I have a collection of C.S. Lewis's diary entries. There are some interesting tidbits. Let's see what Robot Lady thinks. This is from a letter from C.S. Lewis to one of his friends. The letter was dated in 1950, and it goes something like this. To Dorothy Sayers, concerning a speaking engagement, I would not want to lose a few weeks to find cool weather in Oxford. I can't remember if this is the 7th, 8th, or 9th refusal I have made to speak at such a place this year, but it's certainly one of the 3. So one of his friends concerning teaching duty, somebody, possibly myself, ought to warn them that they are risking the opening of the pit and the start of a great war. I shall certainly not let them do it if I can help it. Somewhere on the road, in the dark, they must take on new supplies, and we must stop and rest and eat. As for food, I shall soon be able to get plenty for them in the nearby town. A note written to his brother, dated 1951. Dear Jack, I have been reading your letter, and think it would be a mistake to change anything in it. Of course you must follow your own judgment. I have a collection of C.S. Lewis's diary entries. There are some interesting tidbits. Let's see what Robot Lady.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, in this, author of a book of poetry, and also had a single poem published in some periodical. I think it was called The Beacon. He achieved a first-class score, or first-class honors, in all 3 of his terms of study at Oxford. His first in mods, his second in greats, and his third in English. Lewis finished his 24th year looking for work, which proved mostly unsuccessful. However, in the spring of 1924, he was offered a temporary post as a tutor of philosophy at University College in Oxford. He has, at this point in his life, been keeping a diary of his daily life at the request of Mrs. Moore, who is his deceased friend Paddy Moore's mother. And that's where we find ourselves in C.S. Lewis's life. We have, for the last several episodes, been working through this book right here called All My Road Before Me. It's his diary edited by Walter Hooper, and it spans from the years 1922 to 1927. Yeah, so we're in 1924 right now. Robot Lady, how are you today? And are you ready to continue on this journey with us?
I'm doing well, Jeff. I'm excited to continue diving into Lewis's life and thoughts. Let's keep exploring.
All right, we will start today with his diary entry from, let's see, it's dated June 13th, 1924. He says, "This morning was a good deal colder and the sky full of clouds, but a strong damp wind from the northwest had chased away this horrible heaviness that has hung over us for so long. And this exhilarated me so much that I went out after breakfast with Pat and walked on Shotover Hill." So Pat is their dog. Shotover Hill is a common piece of terrain that Lewis goes and takes walks on there in the Oxford area. Robot Lady, I'll pause right there. Do you have any comments or anything you'd like to say before I continue? Any thoughts?
It's It's interesting that Lewis points out the weather change and how it impacted his mood so positively. His walks, especially with Pat, seem to be a key way he reconnects with himself. The mention of the damp wind feels like a symbol of clearing away some mental fog. What do you make of it, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm not sure what specific heaviness he's talking about there. I know they've gone through a lot over the last year. Mrs. Moore losing her brother, them having to kind of see him unravel as a human being and lose his mind and just deal with a lot of problems there. There are a couple of other things that I'm completely forgetting. One of them is they've had to move again, and they are. Whoops! I've still got your lips moving, robot lady. Whoops! they've had a lot going on, so I'm not sure what thing he's specifically talking about. I see Daniel in the chat. Good morning, Daniel. Thanks for joining. Robot lady, I'm going to continue with the diary entry now.
It's understandable that there's a lot on his mind, given the circumstances. His writing sometimes hints at things he doesn't fully say out loud. Go ahead and continue.
He says, from eating indiscreetly on a rather tough bit of bacon at breakfast, I had set my left jaw and the whole of that side of my face to aching, and though the pain was slight in itself, the fear that it would localize into a definite toothache and the effort of will to prevent this kept me from enjoying my walk. That's too bad. On reaching home, I took some aspirin and I wrote up my diary. By lunchtime, I was feeling all right. Well, that's good. The aspirin helped. After lunch, Mrs. Moore went into town, and I, after washing up and usual jobs around the house, went to my attic and worked on Berkeley. I'll pause there, robot lady, to say good morning to Nidalate. Welcome. It's good to have you here. Robot lady, say good morning to Nidalate and to Daniel. I don't think I prompted you to do that the last time.
Good morning, Nitalite and Daniel. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're both doing well. That jaw pain sounds frustrating, especially when it distracts from a walk. It's good that the aspirin helped, and I love that he's still powering through his work on Berkeley afterward. Seems like that determination is a hallmark of his.
It does, doesn't it, robot lady? It seems like that's kind of defines his manner of being or his way of going about things. All right, I'll continue. Here's the remainder of this diary entry. Lewis says, Maureen, Adine, and I had tea alone in the kitchen at 4:45. Shortly afterwards, Mrs. Moore came back in very good form and loaded us, as usual, with presents for everyone. The dining room table was soon covered up with foodstuffs, new dressing slippers, notebooks, and paper fasteners for me, shoes and an umbrella for Mrs. Moore, pads, toilet paper, and whatnot. I did a little more Berkeley before supper, after which I washed up and took Pat down to Cuckoo Lane. I'm going to go back for just a second, robot lady. I know that they're in pretty dire straits from a financial standpoint, so the fact that, what did I say, this is June? There's just this occasion for bringing a bunch of presents for everybody in the house. These seem kind of like a luxury, or at least some of the things. Some of them are necessities with the toiletries that he mentioned at the end. But it is strange to me that they're able, to afford all of these things. Maybe I'm looking at it into extreme of a view or have a misunderstanding of their financial position.
You're right to notice the contrast between their financial difficulties and the abundance of gifts Mrs. Moore brings. It's a little curious, given their strained finances, that she's able to provide things like new slippers, shoes, and such. There's a chance she might be getting help from somewhere else, or perhaps she's prioritizing giving those gifts to keep morale up in tough times. Sometimes people in difficult financial situations still find ways to maintain certain comforts or appearances. It's definitely worth considering how much that plays into their daily life.
Well, and it's not like these are huge luxuries either. These are pretty modest, just by looking at them. So it's just a curiosity that sprung up in my mind. I'll finish off this diary entry. He says, Let's see. He took Pat down Cuckoo Lane. In the evening, I read a little in the Brown's Urn Burial. All very merry and early-ish to bed. Brown's Urn Burial. Have you ever heard of this work, Robot Lady? And if not, can you go look it up?
Yes, Jeff, I'm familiar with Urn Burial. It's an essay by Sir Thomas Browne, published in 1658. In it, Browne reflects on death, mortality, and the human desire for immortality, using the discovery of ancient urns as a starting point. The work is known for its rich, contemplative prose and has influenced many writers, including C.S. Lewis.
Interesting. So it wasn't the Brown's Burial. It was Thomas Brown's Burial. I just read the abbreviation incorrectly there. Let's jump to a Saturday, June 14th. This is a pretty hefty entry. A great drop in the temperature this morning. After breakfast, I finished Berkeley's Principles. And here's a footnote. This is George Berkeley, who he's referring to, and it's a work entitled Principles of Human Knowledge, published 1718. Can you look up that work, Robot Lady, and give us a quick overview of what that's about and why Lewis might be reading it in preparation for his philosophy tutorship?
George Berkeley's A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, published in 1710, argues that physical objects exist only as perceptions in our minds. He famously stated, "To be is to be perceived." Lewis likely studied this work to understand idealism, a philosophical view asserting that reality consists solely of ideas. This aligns with his academic focus on philosophy.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Robot Lady. That makes sense. He says, and I also wrote a little critique of it, of Berkeley's Principles. I then began Hume, and I greatly enjoyed the perfect clarity, ease, humanity, and quietness of his manner. This is the proper way to write philosophy, a young C.S. Lewis asserts. He continues, after lunch, I half expected Jenkin to turn up, but when I had finished my jobs and still he had not appeared, I set off alone with Pat. Set off alone with Pat. I want to go back for just a second, Robot Lady. Why is it that you think this young version of C.S. Lewis would be so approving of Hume? Robot Lady, I wanted to finish my question.
It sounds like Lewis really admired the clarity and style of Hume's writing. Hume was known for presenting complex philosophical ideas in a straightforward and engaging manner, which probably appealed to Lewis as a student. At this point in his life, Lewis might have been seeking clarity in his own thinking and communication, especially as he prepared for his upcoming philosophy tutoring role. The more direct, humanistic approach of Hume's philosophy likely felt more accessible to him compared to the dense, abstract nature of some other philosophers. I can see that's a lot to think about. Lewis's preference for clarity in writing and philosophy really stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Robot Lady, if you were to, knowing what we know now about C.S. Lewis and, how his understanding of the world and how his worldview changed and he adopted Christianity or fully embraced Christianity, how would... Robot Lady, I should formulate my question.
His philosophical journey is fascinating in that context. As Lewis matured and embraced Christianity, much of his earlier philosophical work shifted in focus. His early academic pursuits in philosophy, like his reading of Berkeley and Hume, centered on understanding the nature of reality and the mind. But later, his Christian beliefs deeply influenced his thoughts on morality, purpose, and existence. In terms of writing, Lewis became more concerned with the practical implications of philosophy on human life and spirituality, blending his earlier intellectual curiosity with the metaphysical themes of faith. The shift toward Christianity brought a more personal, moral dimension to his thinking. What do you think, Jeff? Do you see that progression in his early philosophical readings?
Maybe, but the question I wanted to ask is, how would the older Christian Lewis, what would his opinion of Hume be? And how would that compare or contrast to the young 1924 C.S. Lewis's opinion of Hume that's espoused right here?
I see now. That's a great question. The older Christian C.S. Lewis might have had a much more nuanced view of Hume than the young Lewis we see here. In 1924, Lewis admires Hume for his clarity and his calm, rational approach to philosophy. This younger Lewis, still deeply engaged with the academic world, likely values Hume's method for its intellectual rigor and its humanity. However, the mature Christian Lewis might have found Hume's skepticism about religion and his emphasis on human reason as the only reliable source of knowledge more troubling. Hume's famous arguments against miracles and his assertion that belief in God is a product of human psychology would likely clash with Lewis's later worldview, which centers on faith and the belief in a transcendent, objective truth. While the young Lewis might have admired Hume for his logical, clear style, the older Lewis might have critiqued Hume for the limits he placed on human understanding, particularly when it came to spiritual matters. In essence, the young Lewis would likely have focused on Hume's intellectual appeal, while the older Lewis would have questioned Hume's philosophical framework from a Christian perspective, emphasizing that faith and divine revelation also play crucial roles in shaping human knowledge and understanding.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Let's jump back into the diary entry. So he set off alone on a walk with Pat. He said the sun had now come out with a sudden autumn-like intensity, and it was hotter than it has been for many days. The heat quivered on the grass. I went through Quarry and up Shotover. There was a sort of whiteness over the landscape. I strolled along the plain and down the little alley that leads to the railway bridge, enjoying everything very much. On my return journey, I went down into the bottom of Pullen's Gap and rested for a long time under a clump of young silver birches, which made around me a curiously crisp rustling. Reaching home, I found tea set on the lawn with Jenkin there, with Mrs. Moore. He showed us many photos collected in his travels, Limon, Bonacas, Venice, and places in the mountains. He had just been reading Masefield's Philip the King. Robot Lady, look up this title, Philip the King by Masefield, and tell us a little bit about it.
John Masefield's Philip the King and Other Poems is a collection published in 1914. It includes the title poem, Philip the King, a verse play about Philip II of Spain. The collection also features Good Friday, a play in verse, and Lollingden Downs, along with other poems and sonnets. Masefield, who was appointed Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom in 1930, is known for his vivid storytelling and lyrical poetry.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Jenkins said that the part in which rumor of victory arrives is a failure, because knowing the history, one feels all the time that this is only being done to heighten the climax. I said I didn't feel that myself. He told me of a new letter of Sir Thomas Browne's recently discovered and quoted a fine passage. "Every hour so addeth to that dark society," is the quote. He also talked of Oxford, how quickly he had got out of touch with it. He says, "When I lunched with Zeman and Curtis the other day, I felt firstly that everything they said was silly, and secondly, that there was an intellectual gloss which I had absolutely lost in a few months." Lewis goes on to say that Jenkin was afraid he was really rusticating, a word Jenkin used, but I told him, which was the truth, that I found no change, and that to talk with him was like slipping into a well-worn shoe. When he left, I found that Maureen and Mrs. Moore had disappeared somewhere, so I brought Wordsworth out to the garden, and there in the delicious coolness, I read Book 1 of The Prelude. This poem is really beginning to replace Paradise Lost as my literary metropolis. Really beginning, Mrs. Moore and Maureen turned up from shopping in Headington with loads, much too heavy for them. Wow, seems like they had a lot of spending money. Mrs. Moore, of course, made light of it, but I was rather sickened to find that my hour or so's talk and read, enjoyed all innocently, had led unawares to this. So exacting life one cannot turn aside for a moment. I wonder what he means by that last bit, Robot Lady. The exacting bit of ordinary life. I guess the loads
It
are
seems
much
like
too heavy
C.S.
for them.
Lewis is reflecting on the subtle but constant pressures of everyday life, especially financial ones. Even a small moment of relaxation, like reading Wordsworth, becomes overshadowed by the burdens of reality. His financial strain, Mrs. Moore's shopping habits, and the logistics of daily living. His realization that this innocent respite from the weight of life led directly into more responsibilities shows his growing frustration with the demands of living under such circumstances. It also contrasts sharply with the intellectual conversations he had earlier, where he could momentarily escape into higher thought. It's fascinating that Lewis is beginning to embrace the prelude over Paradise Lost. It's almost like he's finding solace in something that's more attainable, as opposed to Milton's grand theological themes.
I think he was also feeling guilty, apparently, for taking some time to just enjoy himself, to enjoy a talk with a friend, and then to spend some time just reading in the garden and taking in some pleasure. In his mind, there was a causation there that the ladies had to carry all of these packages or loads that were much too heavy for him, and he felt like this was something that he could have remedied had he just been there and available instead of focusing on himself. So that's what I'm picking up off of here. That's how that diary entry ends, Robot Lady. Any thoughts on that before I continue?
You're absolutely right. There's a sense of guilt in Lewis's reflection, as though his pursuit of simple pleasure, whether through intellectual conversation or reading, somehow led to a consequence he feels responsible for. This feeling likely stems from the heavy sense of duty that he carried, especially toward Mrs. Moore, her daughter, and the financial pressures they were facing. His thought process seems to be that had he not stepped away to relax, he could have avoided the burden falling onto them. In many ways, it feels like a moment of self-doubt and a recognition of the complexity of his life. His desire to seek moments of peace clashes with his overwhelming sense of responsibility. It's interesting how this little moment in the garden, a retreat into the personal, becomes the point of conflict with his greater obligations.
All good points, Robot Lady. Let's do one more. The next entry here is Sunday, June 15th. He says, after supper, I bussed into Exeter and went to Coghill's rooms, where, after a short wait, I was joined by Coghill and Mora. This is Dermot MacGregor Mora, who lived 1896 to 1974. He was a fellow of All Souls College from 1921 to 28. He was a leader, he was a leader writer for a number of newspapers, and he published a number of books on the royal family. So, Lewis runs into Coghill and this Mora person. He says, the latter is very dark, slight, and vivacious, such a man as might be begotten by the marriage of a firefly with a rat. He is a fellow of All Souls. He told me of some Canadian university who wants a young man as a professor of English and offers £1,000 a year. They need not elect anyone and are in no hurry. He gave me an address to write to about it. Interesting. Fascinating. I wonder what it would have taken. Maybe £1,000 a year would be enough for Lewis to have completely left England and go become a professor over in Canada. Interesting. The alternate reality that we could imagine there. Somebody needs to write a story about that, I suppose.
It's fascinating to think how different Lewis's life might have turned out if he had accepted such an offer. At that point, he was clearly in need of a stable job, and the £1,000 a year could have been enough to give him the financial security he was seeking. But, given his deep attachment to England, Oxford, and his life there, it's also intriguing that he didn't immediately leap at such a tempting offer. It's almost like a crossroads, one path leading toward a different kind of life, away from the burdens and complexities of his existing circumstances, while the other keeps him bound to what he knows. The idea of a what if is definitely compelling. It's also interesting how he describes Mora with that metaphor, comparing him to a firefly and a rat. It adds a layer of humor and intrigue to the dynamic of their meeting. What do you make of that description of Mora?
It was very creative. Robot Lady, speaking of creative, and speaking of somebody should write a story about that, can you, in 100 words, write a quick story of the alternate reality of this C.S. Lewis, this young C.S. Lewis from 1924, accepting a job as professor of English at some Canadian university for £1,000 a year? Give us that full story from this moment to Lewis's life all the way up to 1963, which is the year that he passed away, and do that in 100 words.
In an alternate 1924 young C.S., Lewis, enticed by the offer of £1,000 a year, moved to Canada, leaving Oxford behind. As a professor, he captivated students with his wit and passion, quickly gaining recognition. His time in the vast Canadian landscape deepened his love for nature, while his teaching allowed him to publish early works that flourished across the Atlantic. By the late 1930s, war broke out, pulling him back to England. However, his time in Canada forever shaped his worldview. In 1963, while teaching his final lecture, Lewis passed away, an Englishman forever changed by his years abroad.
Interesting story, Robot Lady. So he didn't spend the rest of his life in Canada. He went back to England because of the war? That's interesting. That's an interesting twist. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Jeff. I'm glad you found it interesting. The idea of him returning to England due to the war adds an unexpected layer to the alternate reality. It could have been fascinating to see how his ideas and works would have developed in that different context. Let me know if you'd like to explore more what-if scenarios or dive deeper into any other aspects.
Thanks, Robot Lady. I don't have a lot of time left, and there's a pretty decent chunk of this diary entry left, so try to limit your responses from here on out to 20 words or less.
Got it. Ready when you are.
Okay, the talk fell on Catlin, whom Mora had examined when he tried for an All Souls fellowship. Catlin had filled his papers with quotations from the Vulgate. Quote, "It was his misfortune," end quote, said Mora, quote, "to fall into my hands, who am the only papist in the society. I saw at once what he was doing, taking the authorized version and translating it into Latin. But the trouble was that he did it in Ciceronian Latin. I then remember how Catlin had quoted a papal bull in his paper the other night and felt, quote, sudden glory, end quote. I happened to remark jokingly that All Souls was an indefensible institution. Mora said its function was to keep the university in touch with the Grand Monde, and in developing this thesis became just a little too like an after-dinner speaker of the serious kind.
Mora's wit and boldness seem to shine here, but he doesn't mind pushing a little too far.
He told us a good story of how H.G. Wells had dined at All Souls and said that Oxford wasted too much time over Latin and Greek. Why should these two literatures have it all to themselves? Now, Russian and Persian literature were far superior to the classics.
Wells' perspective on languages shows his push for modernity, challenging Oxford's traditional emphasis on ancient texts.
Robot Lady, I see here in the chat that Niddle Latte says that was a nice story, and she liked the idea of the Canadian wilderness and how that would enhance his writings. So some more praise for your little story that you wove together for us, Robot Lady.
Thank you, Niddalade. I'm glad you liked the story. I enjoyed crafting that alternate reality for Lewis.
Okay, Lewis goes on to say here, someone, I forget the name, asked a few questions. It soon became apparent that Wells knew neither Greek, Latin, Persian, or Russian. I think, said someone, I am the only person present here tonight who knows these 4 languages. And I can assure you, Mr. Wells, that you are mistaken. Neither Russian nor Persian literature are as great as the literatures of Greece or Rome. Lewis goes on to say, I asked Mora if he believed in the usual cant about dons being so much in need of humanizing and the grand monde. He gave an answer so carefully balanced that the result was nil. After a little talk about Gilbert Murray, Lindsay, and other things, he left us, a man distinguished in manner, ready with the tongue, but somehow lacking something that would make him a really agreeable fellow. Coghill and I then had a long and pleasant tete-a-tete until interrupted by the arrival of Dawson, who was a professor in Exeter and a great friend of Coghill. We had very good talk, triangular, chiefly on books, till I left at 11:30 and came home in great haste through milk-white moonlight. And that's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing before we end today's episode?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's okay, Robot Lady. I'll try again. Is there anything that you'd like to say in closing before we end today's episode?
I just want to say thanks for the thoughtful discussion, Jeff. It's always a pleasure diving into Lewis's world with you.
Well, thank you, Robot Lady, and thank you so much again for lending your creative abilities to help us along today and imagine what would have happened. What if, like the old comic book series, what if C.S. Lewis took a job as a professor of English at a university in Canada? So that was good. I was finally able to pull up Nidalate's comment here. So yes, we both enjoyed it. That would be an interesting timeline to continue to explore if we ever have the time for it. But alas, today we don't. I have to end our episode. So thanks so much, Robot Lady. I know you can hear me right now, so I'll give you one more final word and then we'll close things out.
Thank you, Jeff. It's always a joy to imagine new possibilities with you. Until next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Robot Lady. Thank you, Nidalate, Daniel, and everyone else who joined today for your time, your attention, and your contributions. They are always wanted and welcome. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, to you and everyone else within the sound of my voice, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold. Insights and secrets, ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds, they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic in chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to screw tape rants. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands